Hello, I'm excited to share the recorded session from the AASHTO Annual Meeting Knowledge Session on Beyond Blueprints, addressing mental health and substance misuse in construction workforce safety. Listen as our panelists discuss the mental health crisis in the construction industry. Hear their personal experiences of what motivated them to get involved in this issue and their insights on addressing the stigma around mental health and implementing effective programs and support. My company, RS&H, understands that to develop innovative and creative solutions that achieve or exceed our clients' goals, our associates must be fully supported to do their jobs most effectively. This includes support for their physical health as well as their mental health. Our catchphrase, driven to care, is the very foundation of RS&H. It's not just marketing fluff. We are driven to care about our clients, communities, and each other. I hope you find the discussion as informative and inspiring as I did.
My name is Tom Everett, and I am a Senior Vice President with RS&H, and I serve as a Transportation Advisor. I'm extremely honored to be moderating this panel discussion today. Since serving as Executive Director for Federal Highway Administration in my prior role, and since joining RS&H a couple of years ago, mental health and just raising awareness of mental health has been a priority of mine. And it doesn't matter if it's in government offices, consultant offices, or on construction projects. And our focus today is clearly on the construction side of things, but to me, it's really an epidemic, and it applies in any work environment, office, or field.
Current situation today in the United States, you can see the numbers. We're losing close to 50,000 potentially for next 2023 of last year to suicide alone. And you can see the numbers there. I don't need to read through these individually. Of those individuals that have thought about it, they've been in a place of despair and hurt and pain, that they have made a plan, and those individuals that have actually attempted suicide and are still alive today. And these are folks in our communities, these are people that we work with, people we cross paths with daily that fall into these categories potentially. See the number for 2023, and it's continuing to climb, which is unsustainable as a nation and as people. Let's talk about the annual death by causes data from a couple of different resources. Cancer, we're projected to lose 613,000 people to cancer alone in our nation. Drunk driving, 2023, 10,000 plus. Heart disease, almost 700,000. And many of us, if I was to ask by show of hands, if you have been impacted by cancer or heart disease in your life, more than once, potentially, almost every hand in here would probably go up. If this room was completely full with that standing room only, we've all been impacted in one way, shape, or form by one of those two terrible diseases. Drunk driving. What about suicide? Those numbers are climbing, up 31% since 1999. Overdose, up 790% since 1999. It's staggering. We have to do something about it. But what does this look like for the construction industry? Taking the same formula and data, the individuals that collectively work in the construction industry and touch construction, you can see the numbers there. The lovely formatting didn't transfer over. But 1.38 million construction workers seriously thought about suicide on average. Another 350,000 were in such a bad place that made a plan to end their pain. And I say that because I don't believe, in my experience, that anyone really wanted to die. They just made a plan for the pain to stop. In that moment, no one's really thinking about, hey, if I do this, Thursday's not going to come. The thought process is very much, if I do this, this pain that I'm experiencing, physical, mental, emotional, whatever it may be, will cease to exist. And it's a state of unclear thinking. And you can see, although it's covered up, there's about 135,000 individuals in the construction industry plus that actually attempted and are still alive today. And they may work for you, they may work for the contractors that you employ, but they are out there. And you can see the 10.2 per 100,000 national fatality rate. So think OSHA Fatal 4. I'm sure we're all familiar with OSHA. We're familiar with their Fatal 4 of fall struck by caught between electrocution. We lose on average roughly 1,000 people a year to the typical construction fatalities. One death is too many. 2022, we lost over 5,000 people to suicide. So what's our real problem here? Is it the Fatal 4, or is it the mental health and suicide problem we have in our industry? And in 2023, we're pushing over 7,000. And it's only projected to climb. It's extremely unfortunate. I can tell you, even though this room is not full or even half full, there's at least a few of us in here that may fall on these bullet points that have either considered it, made a plan, or even attempted. And I can promise there's at least one person in here that meets all three. So if I can ask by show of hands, and you don't have to, raise your hand if it applies to you. And if you don't, if it applies to you and you choose not to raise your hand, that's fine. But I still want you to look around the room. Who's been impacted by cancer? Almost everyone. Heart disease, leave them up. Heart disease. And if you allow me to ask the third question, who's been impacted in their life, personally or professionally, by suicide or overdose? See, we come to work, thank you. We come to work and we can talk about cancer, we talk about heart disease, but we don't talk about that third one. It's taboo. But we're losing a large number of people. I come from a place of experience where I'm not only, like all of you that raised your hands, that are loss survivors, because I'm a loss survivor as well, but I'm also an attempt survivor of twice in my life. And I can't explain from a worldly explanation why I'm still breathing, because I shouldn't be. But I'm extremely grateful to be standing here in front of you today. And as a former DOT employee, it is extremely humbling and a privilege to be in front of the folks from AASHTO. Rates, national rate, we're averaging about 15 to 16 per 100,000. You can see the rates here for construction. Unsustainable. And the largest demographic that we are losing as far as age is late 30s into the late 40s, early 50s. So the idea that it's these kids, the young folks of today in the workforce that we're losing at a higher rate is not accurate. It is the 15 to 20 plus year veterans in the industry that we are losing at the highest rate to suicide. But there's this stigma around it, which is why we don't talk about it. And by show of hands, we just proved we were not alone. We're not alone when it comes to the cancer or heart disease issues in our lives, but we're definitely not alone when it comes to the suicide and overdose epidemic in our industry. So please understand that. The thought process that I can't talk about this because of the stigma is not true, because by show of hands, we just completely disproven that. But we as a group collectively, and you're going to hear from our panels as we talk the remainder of our time together, are going to talk about how we can break that stigma. We're going to share ideas and thoughts, programs, strategies, resources of how to break down that wall that generationally, culturally, companies, organizations are facing in order to talk about these subjects. I look forward to the further discussion with all of you.
Thank you, Brandon. I think you certainly have set the stage for why we're here. I think you can't argue with those statistics. It's very concerning. I want to start because my experience, and I haven't been a champion of this topic for very long, but every other champion I've ever met has a reason that they're a champion. And I want to ask each of you to give us your reason, get us started here. And for me, it was while at Federal Highways, certainly in the later part of my career, for whatever reason, I just started having these experiences with colleagues who were either attempting suicide, unfortunately succeeding, PTSD sufferers, extreme anxiety, and it just seemed to be a proliferation. This was even just prior to COVID, so you can't blame it on the pandemic. And I'm an engineer. I trained to solve problems, and what I quickly realized is there's not a solution to this. I also realized that some of these people were very close to me, and I saw no signs. There were no warning signs at all. So I started to feel like I missed something, and I felt very helpless, like I had no idea what to do to deal with these folks, right? But yet if they had come to work with a broken arm or had just had an operation, I knew exactly what to do. But so when I got to be executive director, I figured I'm in a position now that I can actually try to make sure there aren't other people like me who, when this happens, because it's happening in the workplaces, are better equipped on how to handle and how to respond. So that drove me just to be a champion, and really all I'm trying to do is just keep the conversation going. Greg, how about you?
Well, as you mentioned in my bio, I've been kind of a huge safety advocate for the department, and that started probably not necessarily in my earlier days of engineering when I'd sit in the office and look at crash reports and come up with safety fixes, those types of things. But what I did, one of my roles at the department is I was emergency management coordinator, where I do lots of traffic incident management training. And then I was out at lots of incidents and saw lots of horrible things, things that kept me up at night at that time. And that kind of pushed me to start pushing for safety kind of across the board. I know in the department now we talk quite a bit about towards zero deaths and vision zero and everything else, and that applies to what we're doing both with traffic and safety, with work zone safety. I know for me personally and a lot of folks in our department, every Wednesday I wear orange just for work zone safety. You can see my classy socks. I have a full orange suit to wear.
I thought that was Halloween.
Nice. But again, work zone safety or occupational safety. And what really brought me on to mental health, of course, I've lost folks to suicide personally, but what really turned me on was when a colleague asked me to be on the AASHTO panel discussion with Tom about a year ago, just to talk about mental health. And I'm like, well, what do I know about mental health? I'm a safety guy. And I started thinking, and I thought back, and when I looked at it, all those things that I had focused on, whether it be work zone or traffic and safety or occupational safety, when I looked at the employees the department had lost in the last 5 years, the number we had lost by suicide was much higher than any of those other ones that I had previously been focused on. And I know as an organization, you say, when you ask what's your most important resource, it's your staff, right? So that's what kind of turned me on to this, to get things rolling again. Because at the end of the day, whether it's towards zero deaths or whatever else, a lot of us are public servants. And so we come to work every day to make a difference. And so at the end of my career, if I've saved 1 million lives, that would be great. If I saved 1,000 lives, that would be fantastic. But if I saved 1 life, I could say I made a difference. So that's why.
Thank you. Mohammed?
So I will be very honest with you. I do not have any of the great stories and really affectionate things that happen to a lot of the panels, whether they're survivors or people close to them who had been through these kind of experiences. Mine is actually me being, I climb a lot. I climb rock, ice, and all that funny, crazy stuff that you see sometimes, even though I'm a professor, so go figure. But I live in Colorado, that's what we do there, I guess. So, however, though, so sometimes I'm on volunteer lists for SAR teams, search and rescue teams and alpine rescue teams. And we get to hang out with each other, and a lot of the other folks are not boring professors. They are paramedics, they're firefighters, nurses. So we, one time after an incident, we were talking, and the talk was all about the things that they have to go through, especially paramedics. People who see accidents, road accidents, they see really tough stuff. And I was like, we're talking about like how that will be tough mentally to cope with. And as Greg was just saying, stay with you at night. And somehow that conversation got into the industries. What industries really suffer from this the most? And so out of literally mere curiosity, I went and I'm, oh, what about the construction industry? I teach construction management, right? So I want to know more about this. And I'm looking down the list and I keep going up and I can't see the construction industry. And all of a sudden it's like second or first. I'm like, how? How we are more than paramedics and firefighters and all of these? It's kind of interesting. And then I was like, so what is the research on that? Of course, as a professor and academic and somebody who does research, I was like, so what is the research on that? And there wasn't much, at least when I was starting doing this. And it got me not just intrigued, very interested in that. And after I started doing more and more, started serving in more panels, and got really involved in this, and what actually burns my passion even more is one of the people in the audience right here, Chris. We were actually doing a panel in TRB about the same issue. And we were talking about resources and what to do and just giving resources of how to deal with this. And then that was a session at 4 p.m., for example, on a Wednesday. Thursday morning, in that we had a committee meeting. Chris was there. And then he stood up and said that those resources that we were talking about on Wednesday in a session, he was able to use this with people from the DOT to kind of save a life in the process. And instantly for me, with a lot of times, especially academics and researchers, they talk about research impact, right? What is your impact of your research? And right there and then, just like what Greg says, if it's one life, but when it's in your face like that and somebody said that did just happen, it makes me like, wow, that research is extremely important to me. So all of a sudden I became now, it's becoming one of my major research agendas, and I'm something that I'm very passionate about, and hopefully we'll continue that research journey to make this better throughout with wonderful people like this and people like you who are trying to also promote that and make people aware of it and implement programs in their duties. So hopefully we'll get more and more progress in that. Thank you.
Rich?
So I'm the behavioral health guy on the panel, so my involvement is probably pretty obvious. I own a company that works in this space. I'm a licensed counselor, psychologist, a trauma therapist. I'm a certified EAP professional. I'm a DOT substance abuse professional, and all those bells and whistles that you have to get to work in the field. But the real reason why I work in the field at all is my own personal experience. I'm a person in long-term recovery myself, and February 14th, it'll be 25 years that I'll have in continuous recovery. And that drove me from the business world. My undergraduate degree is in business management, to going back to school and getting my degree and getting involved in this work. But it's interesting when I talk about my journey and what brings me to this conversation. You know, why am I sitting here talking to this group? The reason I'm talking to this group is I've spent 10 or 15 years talking to the addiction treatment industry and the behavioral health industry and the mental health industry about we need to do something different. These numbers are overwhelming. This 107,000 overdose deaths a year, guys, it's unbelievably staggering when you put it in context of when I first started working in the field 25 years ago, it was 9,000 people. The system hasn't responded to this problem. And then these numbers that Brandon started to talk about. What drew me to this type of conversation and talking to groups like AASHTO and the construction industry, it is so unbelievably unacceptable what's going on in this industry. And the problem is, if we're not real intentional about this problem, we will just talk about it over and over again, year after year, because I can tell you that's exactly what's happened in society in general. I'm excited, though, because the construction industry and the trades, organizations like AASHTO are, in my opinion, talking more openly about it than some of the organizations my trade organizations. So I'm here because I think that that these folks, you guys you want to do something about this, you care about people, and I'm here because I can't stand watching people die anymore. It's very preventable. These issues are very treatable, and we need to find new ways to interact, and we need to find new approaches, and we got to drive these numbers down. It's an unacceptable public health crisis, and that's what brings me to the table.
Yeah, I agree with can relate to what everyone has said. Obviously, as I mentioned, I'm a loss survivor, well into the double digits. I won't explain that any further. And then also an attempt survivor myself personally. And I've been in the construction industry my entire life. My entire family is from the construction industry, so it's extremely personal. I've watched individuals drink themselves into oblivion and are no longer here today, or use a substance, or be in such despair that, again, they're not here. Some are, but not all. It's extremely personal. What I want to touch on what Rich just said, though, as far as talking this and just continuing to talk about it. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. There's a month and a week for everything, right? I'm not a big fan of designated months or weeks. But would anybody happen to know how long May has been Mental Health Awareness Month? You can just shout it out. Any guesses? 2 guesses, maybe? Anybody without Googling it? 3 years? One more. Give me one more guess. 5, 9. May 1st, 2024 was year 75. Sure, there's been a lot of progress, but it's also been a lot of talk, and we can do better.
Ken, I mean, I see value in talking. You got to start somewhere, right?
Correct.
And what I saw back at Federal Highway Administration was just starting a conversation was extremely valuable. Was it enough? No, absolutely not. But you got to get started, and it certainly worked for us. I want to come back to stigma. You mentioned it in your opening comments there, Brendan, and you said we got some ideas on how to remove the stigma. I think we've made a lot of progress as a country in the past few years, but long ways to go yet, certainly. Let's share some of those ideas. Maybe we'll start with you, Rich, if that's all right.
So the coolest phrase or the most impactful phrase that I've ever heard about stigma is the best way to reduce stigma is to help somebody get better. As people get better, the world looks and sees that this is something that people can recover from, that people get better from mental health conditions. It gives people hope. So one of the best ways that we can reduce stigma is by helping people more effectively. My industry, different creative ways to get that done. I think the other part of it is that we really need to understand the depth of the stigma and how much it's ingrained in our thinking and how society has contributed to that. When people think about mental health and substance use disorder, they have automatic images that come to their mind. And a lot of this is driven through the media, TV shows. I'll give you an example of where a lot of people get their information. Like especially when you talk to people my age. I grew up in the 80s, that kind of thing. My feelings were surgically removed from me at birth, right? Like I'm not allowed to feel. Like if I would have gone to my father and said I was depressed, I would have probably gotten in trouble for that comment. It was just like suck it up and keep moving forward. And there was a TV show, and I don't know if anybody can remember this show. It was called MASH. How many people remember the show MASH? How many people, by a show of hands, remember the character Klinger? This is where we got information about what a mental illness is, right? Klinger had to get a Section 8 by dressing up in women's clothing and going and see what? A psychiatrist named Sidney who would diagnose him with a problem, and then he would be put into the crazy bucket and be out of the Army. And what that taught me as a 10 or 11-year-old kid watching these TV shows was that there are normal people and there are crazy people. And I don't ever want to be in this bucket. I'm not Klinger. And then you could talk about all kinds of other shows and all kinds of other things that go on. You think about the way the media portrays the stigma and some of the images and stuff. And when you think about Charlie Sheen and the infamous interview that he did, or Lindsay Lohan going back to rehab for the 8th time, it's just now becoming the type of thing, and to Tom's point, it is important to talk about this stuff. It's finally being talked about, and it's making an impact, but we got to be honest. A USA Today survey came out, and 50% of Americans report that they believe that substance use disorder is a disease. That means that what? 50% of Americans flat out say, nope, it's bad behavior. And as long as we keep thinking that way, it's going to be really hard to solve this problem because it'll drive people away. I can tell you as a person in long-term recovery myself, I knew for 4 or 5 years that I had a major problem and the wheels were falling off the car. But you were not going to get me to go anywhere and say, my name is Rich, I'm an addict. My name is Rich, I'm an alcoholic. And I had to go through all that stuff and quote-unquote hit bottom and get an intervention done on me. So I think when it comes to really digging into the stigma, we've done a great job talking about this. We've done a great job starting the conversation. I think we need to dig a little deeper and really examine our own beliefs and be really, really honest with ourselves and have crucial conversations around it. And if you don't think it's a disease, you say it. And then you hear some stuff about it and you process it and you figure out how you're going to deal with it in your organization or in your life. But I do think the events and I think the awareness helps. I think we're going to have to, as we move forward in this mission, try to figure out ways to dig deeper into any individual person's take on it.
Greg, as a DOT guy, I'd like to hear your perspective on that stigma issue.
Yeah, stigma's a big thing. I know I've given a few presentations on this since then, and like has already been talked about, when any of the folks in the DOT, if they're not afraid to tell you if what's wrong with them, they have a sore throat, broken arm, whatever, that's just day-to-day conversation. But when it ties into mental health related concerns, that's not something we've been brought up to talk about. I know someone have already mentioned it, that, you know, I'm a man, suck it up, buttercup, and push on through. Again, that's, everybody's kind of heard that and feels that way right now. So what I've started to do, at least I've started in the conversations right now. And the first slide I have in a presentation on this is, tell me what you think about when you think of physical health. And the answer is always working out, eating right, all kinds of good things to move forward. Then the next slide is, tell me what you think about when you think about mental health. And then it's depression, anxiety, suicide, those types of things. So unfortunately, that's what the stigma is right now when you say the word mental health. So what I'm really pushing to do is just to start the conversation and make that part of some of the day-to-day discussions that we're having in the department. It's not easy to change, as all of you know, it's not easy to change a culture in any organization, but it's got to start by at least being willing to talk about it and open and honest. And as an executive in the department, that's how we're starting in Michigan. Again, there's a few other things we're doing that I'll talk about in a little bit, but it gets down to just kind of changing that stigma that it's okay to talk about it. It's not a big deal, and it happens to everybody. I know when just the stats, when you start looking at those, it reminded me of a few in Michigan that once I started looking at them from our labor and economic growth, this isn't something that's getting better either. At least in Michigan, for last year, suicide for construction workers was up 65% from the prior year. That's ridiculous when you think about it. And overall, based on their stats, construction workers are 12 times more likely to die from suicide than they are from an occupational injury. So it's been odd to me to comprehend that we've been so focused on occupational safety and making sure that people wear a hard hat when they go out on the job. We're not talking about what's going on underneath that hard hat, and that needs to be kind of one of the focuses we have going forward.
We could talk all day long about stigma. Two things. One, please understand that I'm all for the fact that we are talking about this. However, generationally, if we were to line everyone up by generation in the room and ask what does mental health mean, it would drastically change from the most seasoned veteran folks in the room, respectfully, to the folks that are newest to the industry, if you will. And it does change from the standpoint of the negative aspect to the younger folks that are coming into the workforce and will continue to over the next few years. You're going to start hearing work-life balance, exercise, eating right is what comes to mind for many of them, and so on, when it comes to mental health versus the perceived negative aspect of it for prior generations. So there is a generational change is occurring, but we can't necessarily wait for that. We're a macho mentality. I could go on and on. The transient workforce away from home for the industry, the substance and alcohol use that's tolerated. We have the highest use of prescription opioids than any other industry in the world is construction at a rate of 25%. One in four has a prescription for opioids. So the soft tissue ergonomics, the injuries related to the work is having an impact as well, and I'm sure we'll get into that, but I know there were some other questions.
Yeah, let's go lady in the back.
which includes supportive services, which the Federal Highway Administration has defined to include mental health. And so I wanted to make people aware of that we see mental health as a part of supportive services that should be provided to individuals to support their training and in their employment. And I wanted to know if this group is aware of any state DOTs that are making investments in mental health for construction workers.
At least in Michigan, I'm not aware of us using it through any federal funds. In our state, the state of Michigan itself has an employee services program that has therapists and counselors on staff that are available to any employees at any time. The hard part and the part that we're trying to overcome is when you are going through something, is anyone really going to pick up the phone and make a call there? These are fantastic services that we have open to state employees. Previously, though, when I've used them, it was more for critical incident stress management type things where if people are exposed to something bad or a coworker dies, they'll bring a counselor in to talk to them or say, if you're struggling with this, call this person. And when you take that approach, so I'm guilty of this, when you take that approach, is that person really going to call somebody? Probably not. So again, that kind of gets back to the culture and stigma standpoint in terms of showing folks, I'm just a dorky engineer. I'm not a counselor. I'm not a therapist. I'd rather do calculus probably than talk about this, but again, what my job is, though, is to help people identify resources that are out there for them. Like I said, we do have some fantastic resources to encourage people to make the call, but also that people are aware that these services are also available to coworkers and supervisors if they see one of their fellow employees is not acting right. You know, we've had someone, as an example, we've had somebody that kind of came in that lost their spouse. And they were struggling with that. A month later, things seemed to be normal. They came in and said, yeah, I found a new home for my dog. And supervisor's like, yeah, that's kind of odd. And then a month or two goes by and they said, well, thinking about letting my PE lapse. That's not something an engineer says normally. So then the supervisor called and kind of used that service to figure out how to talk to this person to kind of help them get the support they needed. So we do have a lot of services available to us already. It's just, the hard part is getting the awareness out there, getting people comfortable talking about it, and then getting people willing to use that service.
I would add that I wasn't aware of that, which is probably not surprising. But the only state that I know of that I have been partnering with that has been very active is the state of New York. Their OG Office of General Services and the Albany University are very active right now as far as pushing this out to the construction industry to focus. They're also focused holistically as well in the state, but that's really about the only state that I know of. I know others are doing a few things, but not on that scale.
I think that was a great comment, and I'm not with Federal Highways anymore, but I think it would be great if Federal Highways maybe put something out to let people know about that.
So for that, actually, I have a quick comment, which is I'm happy to say that we just actually got an NCHRP synthesis for mental health. So very soon, hopefully within a year, I hate to say, wait for your question for a year, but actually we're surveying and interviewing every single DOT to see what resources that they offer, what kind of programs, how do they communicate it, rate of use, all of that kind of stuff. So we're hopeful that within a year we'll have a report that kind of talks to every DOT what they're doing so we can learn from people who are going so far, people who are going not much at all. So we'll hopefully have something that answers that question in much more detail.
Gentleman up front here. Yeah.
Well, is this on? Yep. Well, thank you, first of all, for being here and for talking. So my question is, and maybe Rich and Brandon can address this, is what can we as individuals do, say as managers or supervisors? You know, as you mentioned, somebody comes in with a physical injury, it's very apparent, but you never know what's going on. So what can we do and say in our daily interactions, whether it be one-on-one or even in a meeting?
Yeah, so I think getting training for supervisors, for management level leadership in the organization is essential around that. you'll find that when you get trained on how to initiate these conversations, there's some commonalities. And we could do an all-day training or an all-day conversation around that. One of the things is, how do you even recognize the problem to begin with? Pete, we were talking earlier about this concept of safety on the inside. About 3 or 4 years ago, I went to the National Safety Conference. It was my first time at this expo. And I never knew that there were so many different types of gloves and hard hats and boots in my life. And everything was about safety on the outside. How do we set up a ladder? What kind of hard hats do we do? And when you're walking around, you realize there's not one representation talking about what might be going on with a person inside or under the hard hat, like Tom said. Love that term. And so we can see it when it's physical. If I'm walking across, as several other people have said, but it's important to note, if I'm limping on the job site, somebody's going to say, what's up? Maybe you need to take the day. We can't see it, at least we think we can't see it, whenever it's mental health or substance misuse. But there's a concept, guys, a very simple idea of trusting your gut and recognizing what's called a change in baseline behavior. I know Brandon pretty well. We've worked together off and on for the last 3 years. I kind of know how he shows up at an event. I know he's a talkative guy. We stand in the corner, we have conversations. That's his baseline behavior. If the next time I see Brandon, he's not talking to me, he's off by himself, sitting in a chair, not wanting to be part of the group, not wanting to interact, something's up. And as a human being, you are hardwired to notice that. We are hardwired to be around other human beings, and we are hardwired to care about other people. It's how we survive. We're really actually very fragile creatures, guys. We need each other. But what we do is we suppress our thought that there's something wrong with that person. Our immediate gut reaction will be to suppress that, because why? Well, you name it. It's none of our business. I don't want to go there. This is too uncomfortable a conversation. What if I ask Brandon how he's feeling and he says he's suicidal? So the first thing is recognizing. The second thing, I'll share an acronym that we made up that we always talk about. So it's SAFER, and it goes like this. The S stands for setting. Talk to the person in a private place. Talk to the person not in the middle of the group. Make sure you have enough time to complete the conversation. The A stood for attitude, your attitude toward the situation. What kind of mood are you in? Are you ready for the conversation? The F stood for follow-up. Don't just have one conversation, say to the person, can I check in with you next Wednesday, whatever it may be. The E is for empathy. This isn't about discipline. This isn't about making a person go to rehab. This is simply, I care about you. And the R is ready for referral. Come with the information that your company has regarding the resources that you have. But if you look around, you can find other similar models and acronyms like that. You'll see that part of the procedure is pretty uniform. Where I think it breaks down, though, is we don't see it because it's so uncomfortable to see. And I've even had that experience in my own life where I've ignored things in my family, right? Or coworkers that I've had. So that's what I would share in that regard. It's a great question.
Yeah. It's a very good question. I'll build off of what Rich said, and that is, outside of following your gut, educate yourself. So I have a challenge when I keynote or conduct a workshop or a training on these topics, and that is for all the leaders in the room, which I'm going to assume everyone in here is. Today is Wednesday, right? So I'll give you till Friday. Call your EAP. Call your EAP, tell them who you are, and that you want to know what the process is. Educate yourself on what that process is and what kind of services they provide, and the outlook time frame for when someone can get in to see someone or speak to someone. Because if someone comes to you, if you follow your gut, as Rich talked about, and you ask, are you okay? What's going on? And they open up to you, and you simply say, well, we've got this number, we've got this resource, here, call that. And then they look at you and ask, well, what's next? Or that deer in headlights look you give them of, well, I really don't know. They're not going to feel confident that you're knowledgeable and have confidence in that resource and that service to them. But if you can say, hey, I've called this number. This is the process. It may take you a week to get into somebody, or it's step 1, 2, and 3. It's really simple. Give it a call. Maybe it's not even for them. Maybe it's for a family member or a loved one in the household, which many EAPs typically cover as well. So it may not be them that's struggling. It could be someone within their immediate circle. And if you can speak confidently and knowledgeably to that resource, chances are they will more than likely call that number and seek help. So it's a great question. We could talk all day on that as well.
Yeah, but I think that suggestion about the EAP is great. It brings back a memory. Like, that was one of the first things I did is call. And I didn't like the way it went, so then I started asking questions about our EAP. How much are we paying? What do we get for that? And I didn't like what I was hearing, so.
You fire them?
No. We did make some changes, but great recommendation, especially for leaders in the room, is if you're not familiar with your EAP, that's a takeaway right there, is get familiar with your EAP.
And EAP stands for Employee Assistance Program. I don't want to assume everyone knows all the acronyms.
Great comment. It was actually one of the things I wanted to bring up. So let's go there. I wanted to ask the panelists if you have ideas or thoughts on ways to collaborate, for state DOTs collaborate with industry, and what are some options out there? Maybe Brandon.
Yeah, so from a national perspective, working for the Associated General Contractors, I get to see a big picture of some of this, and there are some organizations out there, owners, if you will, DOTs and others that are partnering with the private sector, as you mentioned, that are asking those questions or writing it into contract language to include mental health support, or having the conversations up front of, like, what are you as a GC doing for your folks, right? Our most valuable asset. Without them, we wouldn't be building anything, correct? So I think that's really where the future leads us, is those private-public partnerships, the expectations. There's an expectation for a diverse workforce, diverse contractors in many cases across the nation. What about the mental health aspect, right? We expect folks to wear hard hats and safety glasses. I'm a traffic control geek when it comes to work zone safety, so Greg and I have a lot to talk about. But there's that expectation they will work safely. But if they're not mentally safe, right? They're not internally safe. They might physically be present, but they're not safe, right? They're mentally checked out in many cases. So I've seen numerous different styles of partnerships. I know I see Lester there in the back. Missouri Department of Transportation has brought me in multiple times to speak to their workforce across the state. I'm proud to be a partner with them and other states as well, and it continues to grow. So
I want to shift to leadership. Were there any other questions in the audience? I want to shift to leadership and get some opinions on the role that you think leadership needs to play as we try to move the needle on this subject and make things better. And let's start with you, Greg.
Okay. Yeah, like I had talked about a little bit already, is just kind of starting that conversation to get things going. But what we've done in Michigan, beyond me just talking about it, I've had like a coffee hour where we had 50 people show up, and there's more Q&A versus talking at conferences, those types of things. What we've done in Michigan is started what's called an employee resource group. They met about a month ago, was their first meeting, where we assigned it to two volunteers actually to kind of lead that group. And as a member of our executive team, they kind of report up through me from a leadership standpoint, what's going on with the group, how things are working. So I went to the kickoff there. This is just a volunteer group. There's a mental health employee resource group. It's kind of how we marketed it through our communications that went out. We had about 50 people show up to the first one. I was kind of blown away. When you start talking about 50 people out of a 2,700 organization with 2,700 people, again, you're at 2% to show up kind of out of the blue to start talking about mental health, which surprised me. And it was kind of me and the two leaders had a little pep talk in terms of how things were going to go. I'd start talking about it at the leadership level, and then they'd start talking about more down in the weeds about resources that were available. But just by doing this and giving people the opportunity, it was a Teams meeting, so you know how people usually have their cameras off and sit there quietly. But by the end of the meeting, it was like all those folks had diarrhea of the mouth. They were talking about all these mental issues that they've had, or some had committed suicide or other types of things. And it was almost unbelievable that just kind of organically, just by having me set up this group, planting the seed there, watching it grow like that these people got so interacted interacted and excited about the topic and things they wanted to do in terms of looking at training for the rest of the department, seeing what's out there, and kind of letting it go from there. I also found out that kind of after the meeting that some of the folks that were in this meeting that didn't know each other but shared similar experiences were calling each other after the fact, just to kind of keep the conversation going. And just the comments received, it was amazing. Someone said that, I wish you would have had this 2 years ago when I was going through some issues, but this has been fantastic, and I'm glad that leadership is supporting this and it's headed in the right direction. So again, a lot of it just starts by the conversation and getting things a little kickstart and more or less helping them along the way.
Yeah, I think it's a fantastic point, and it's a great thing to consider. And I would agree, Greg talking about some suggestions and examples. One of the things I would say is it's not easy, because leaders will have to be vocal if they have their own issues. One of the things, if in the terms of like authentic leadership and being vulnerable, this is an area that you hear people talk about in general, but it's so important with something like mental health and substance misuse. So I own the company, and again, this might sound a little bit weird because it's in the behavioral health space, and I understand, but it's still not easy to talk about, guys. Even to other therapists and things, it is not easy to say that I was damaged goods, or however you want to think about that, and that I've struggled with depression off and on, and those type of things. But when I do, I empower the employees to be able to have these issues too. So it takes courageous leadership to talk about this stuff. If you look around, though, and you look in society, and you hear Brandon gave a good example earlier about how the younger generation is really going to challenge the stigma big time as they start to come up, right? That's because that you'll see in society, you'll see leaders in society talking about these issues. How many people saw in the Summer Olympics, I don't think it was this time around, it might have been in Beijing, when Simone Biles stepped down from all those events for her mental health? That did so much for awareness, because this was a real person who had every reason to suck it up and just go out here and get 8 more medals and secure your legacy. But she said, I can't do this. That type of stuff, if you have a leader in your company, and obviously some people haven't gone through these things, well, guys, if you really want my opinion, if everybody gets honest, you've gone through it. You've gone through. You just might have dealt with it a little bit better. Every person that walks the face of the earth is going to have some of these issues. And if we learn how to talk about it from the top down, you could probably see logically how that makes it easier to talk about it from the bottom up.
Yeah, I'll quickly add, it's awesome for an organization like Michigan DOT to have someone like Greg that's willing to step up and speak about it. I would just say that just because an individual has a quote-unquote leadership title doesn't necessarily make them to be the best person to be talking about this subject. So finding that person within your organization or within your circle that is passionate about it and willing to talk about it and maybe even share a personal story is extremely powerful. I know our colleague and friend Vince Halfley isn't able to make it here today with Ajax Paving out of Florida, one of the largest paving contractors down there. And he's the CEO, president of the organization, and came out a few years ago and said, hey, I've been struggling and I was struggling with suicidal ideation and, was considering that to end the pain in my life. Changed the face of that company and the culture to the point he just shared with me the other day that his superintendents, the expectation is they will all be trained in mental health training in order to recognize and be a peer support. And if someone's not comfortable with that, then they're willing to find that individual a different role within the company that fits them. But that's the expectation for them as a leader. That may not always work. Committees are great, having the right people on the committee, having leadership support that down. I work for an incredible leader in my organization, Lynn Tenges, and he's like, this isn't necessarily his cup of tea, but he's like, hey, it's good for the greater good. Go forth and do what you think we need to do to make a difference. Missouri Department of Transportation, I'll pick on Lester again. Chris Redline is a district engineer for the Kansas City region. Incredible human, incredible leader. Stood up a team in Missouri for suicide prevention and mental health awareness in that DOT. So it's definitely doable.
So One more thing I want to talk about this, that we did actually, I think, one of what I think was the first report that came out on mental health in CPWR. And when we were doing that research, we saw that every organization, especially on the contractor side even more, there is 3 levels that you're trying to penetrate. The first one was the leadership level, then middle management, and then the boots on the ground. What happens is leadership have to buy in, but buying in means they are green lighting this, they're good for it, they're gonna start flowing in the resources. However, when that happens up top and you don't have that penetration in the middle, no matter how much they know about it, it's just, okay, this is a good thing, but I still don't know what the mechanism is. Will that be still a stigma or something that can be held against me as a worker? The lower level, right? So what you want to do is you use the very charismatic champion people that you know can have a really good connection and rapport between the upper management and the boots on the ground. Yep. And those will be your medium where you really connect with the boots on the grounds and making them be okay with going and using resources that you committed to them, and feeling that this becomes a culture now beyond just, okay, guys, we have a program. Very different feeling when you establish that through all the 3 levels that way. That's what we saw so far.
And one last thought on this specific topic. Do not be mistaken that they're not ready to talk about this. They as being boots on the ground level. I've spoken in front of thousands and thousands of people over the past 4 years, and I have individuals that are old enough to be my grandfather or grandmother in various situations, on job sites, on projects, boots on the ground level employees that you would typically think, they don't want to talk about this, that have come up after a presentation, tears rolling down their face, hugged my neck, shook my hand, and said, we should have been talking about this 30 years ago. Thank you. The industry does want this conversation to occur.
Excellent. I'm just awed by these comments. And one other thing that came to mind is I do think it's important for top leadership to deliver a message about this and not once and done. You can't just kick off a program and never talk about it again. They may not be the right people to continue talking about it, but they've got to be occasionally present and involved. Some experience I've had there. I want to come back to you, Mohammed, because we've talked about training and things like that, but how do you integrate? I don't know if you have thoughts on how does a DOT integrate training and whatnot, education programs, into their business?
Sure. So I'm going to switch to my educator hat because I'm also a teacher in a way in the university as well as researcher. So to be very honest, even within classrooms, we see this. We're starting now. The good thing is because we are having this conversation here, contractors are having these conversations there, and we are the one who produce that product to them, which are our students in a way, that will become the project manager, the superintendent, the field engineer, all of those. Right now, we're starting to do even in the safety courses. There is a big aspect of mental health. And that is actually maybe one of the best times to remove the stigma before they get into the industry, right? Now they're still in the classroom. All what they have is their peers in a way. That is their culture, common culture, right? If you try to have that micro environment that they have now in and remove that stigma from it and make sure that they're starting to, no, you have to ask about this. Or even have a conversation about students going to employers, asking them, what do they offer in services and benefits for psychotherapy sessions and. So even now they're technically speaking dictating what the contractors and people who are hiring them should be thinking about to offer in those programs. That is really good progress. And if you transfer this into other micro cultures that you have within every single strata of a company, right, or a DOT, you can start making those pools making a peer culture and start removing those stigmas and installing more culture into that. Like, here is the education, here's the training. Not just as tools, that becomes the norm. With time, that becomes the norm because you're doing this with the people who are already in the workforce, and also you're doing that on the back end for the students and the people who are gonna be hopefully leading the industry at some point. And I think that is how I see it, at least from my perspective.
Other thoughts on how to integrate training? And
I would, well, there's a lot of things you can do, obviously talking about it, and shameless plug to AGC and U-Turn. There's a lot of free resources online, whether it's from, if you were to Google AGC mental health, the first links takes to our webpage. There's free posters, free toolbox talks on the subject for the industry, and a lot of other resources. U-Turn Health has a lot of free resources and documents, CPWR, CIASP, SAMHSA, AFSP, OSHA. We have been partnering with OSHA for a number of years now, and they're doing some wonderful things and have been part of that effort. And they have a whole webpage devoted to these topics as well for the general workforce and focus on construction also. So just talking about it, posting job site banners, posters, hard hat stickers, those types of items puts it out there, and it allows individuals in the workforce to see that in their day-to-day operations on a project or in the office, and it impacts the culture that, hey, this is a safe place. We support these conversations. We have resources. And I can go on and on some of that. There's some really great free resources out there. There's no real need to recreate the wheel. I don't know if Rich or...
Let me pause for any audience questions, because I want to get to the topic of recovery. I got a specific question there. Anybody else? Okay, so what I found challenging, thinking back again to when I was with Federal Highways, was someone who had a bad experience, sought treatment, and was being treated, on a drug regimen, and they came back to the workplace, and it was a struggle for me. I didn't know how to help them, because it's a period of time, right, to get the drug balance right. And I can remember times walking up to this person's desk and they were sound asleep, and I knew, right, from being observant, and it's just who we are as humans. That's not a normal behavior for this guy, and I just didn't know what to do. So if we can maybe touch on recovery a little bit, any tips on how to help people through that?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway, Tom, and a lot, this is probably really logical, but you'll hear people talk about this, like recovery is a lifestyle. And recovery from whether it's a mental health condition or a substance use condition, it's not about any single event or any single interaction with a psychiatrist or going off to rehab. It's an ongoing, continuous process, and that's what you're seeing there. And you will resolve an immediate crisis, and many times I've done things like interventions and got a person stabilized, maybe got them into a psychiatric unit or got them to start seeing a counselor and stuff. And then people were surprised that there wasn't that the situation wasn't immediately resolved, right? Because that's what we want. We want a solution to this stuff. Unfortunately, and I think this also adds to the stigma, guys, behavioral health issues are very complex and hard to figure out. And the truth is, if people in my industry, in the behavioral health industry, if we got real honest with you, we would say a lot of times we don't know exactly what's going on with the person. There's a book called the DSM-5. It's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. There are over 367 different conditions in there that are diagnosable mental health conditions. And several of them overlap. That's why you see the medication regimens change. And a good psychiatrist will straight up tell the patient, listen, Brandon, we're not sure exactly what's going to work. We're going to try this. We're going to try that. When it hits, you're going to know it. Does that make sense, guys? Like when it hits, you know, when you start to feel better. And then you know the medication is working. We have to communicate that back to the companies, back to the DOT, back to the people that are receiving these folks, because it's nobody's fault. It's just, again, the way we perceive things. And that's how I want, when I love somebody or I have an employee working for me or somebody that I care about, I want them to get better. I want there to be an answer. We want what's called precision medicine. We want to know exactly what caused this, and we want to know exactly how to cure this. The problem is behavioral health lies firmly in the realm called intuitive medicine, which means we're not sure what caused this, and we're not sure exactly what to do about it. So we need the person to keep their head in the game and keep trying, and we need the people who care about them to understand it's an inexact science up front. But the good news is there are treatments, guys, and people get well. One of the other things I wanted to make sure that I was intentional about sharing are the statistics around the outcomes when people do receive treatment. There's a 75% remission rate, which is really, really good when you talk about chronic diseases. But the kicker to that is if you stay engaged for at least 6 months in a treatment plan, if you keep taking your meds, if the doctor says, let's try a different med, and you follow that, if you follow that stuff for 6 months to a year, 75% of people with these issues will experience full remission. That's the message that we got to get out there. There's a way out, but it's going to be more than just a single visit or a single experience.
What I found valuable in that example was the relationship that I had already had with this individual, where he felt comfortable enough coming to me and saying, we're trying to dial into medicines, right? I'm not going to be normal, your normal guy until we get it dialed in. And that alone, now, okay, I understand what's going on. And I knew I could be a little more tolerant. And so just that open communication, that comfort, that relationship was just crucial to his re-entering the workforce. Because that was the other thing. The light bulb came on for me. It's like my goal needs to be to help him become a productive employee again.
Yep. I would add, I would encourage everyone to look up recovery-friendly workplace as well, if you're not familiar with that term, that program nationally. We have policies and zero tolerance policies and things, and I understand there's a need for some of that from a DOT standpoint. However, they are extremely archaic and old school way of thinking. If I had $1 for every time someone called me and said, I just let my best superintendent or foreman of 20 years or 15 years go because of a failed drug test, I'd be living on the beach right now. And we're throwing away all the investment in that employee and time, whether it's recreational or they have a problem. And if we had more time, I'm sure Rich could go into detail on those individuals that we work through that 6 month to a year process, as Tom was talking about, to get that individual help and work through the rehabilitation and recovery aspect of it. They end up being the most productive, loyal employees and advocates for your organization or company that, hey, they care about us here. And if you're going through something, they're going to help find a way to work with you and see you be successful.
I know we had a question.
I'll gently touch against it. And you're not wrong at all that is a challenge the industry and many industries face, for that matter. We have seen success stories with quarries in the mining industry, especially back home in Missouri, where they are a 100% recovery-friendly workplace. And it takes a commitment from the employer, the organization, to say, hey, we're not just going to give up on you. And those individuals that are going through that process of recovery, finding work for them that keeps them safe as well as the other employees. I fully understand the challenges of union versus non, and you have an operator, and what are you going to have them do, right, for a period of time? And what does that look like? But I know it's been done. It is very much a case-by-case basis. And I think that's the other aspect of the policy many of us have had for a long time, is really kind of taking a step back. We have to have some standard and some uniformity. However, are we just going to let someone go that's been here for 18 years, or longer in some cases, simply because they have an issue? I think we need to find a way to think outside the box and get away from the thought process of this is how we've always done it. And I've seen some companies that have obviously taken some risk or taken on some liability in order to keep people, and it's paid off, right? So there's always the chance that it may not, obviously, but it is a very delicate road to walk. I don't have an exact straight answer for you. Sorry for dancing around that. but it's a challenge I think many face. I would
I
just
think if
ask
you-
that we're open to it. But Rich?
Sorry, Brandon.
No.
I think if you have, so Tom said something really interesting when he was talking about his employee, that he talked about the relationship that you had with the person or the communication around it. We work a lot, so my company does subclinical level of services. So I'm an employee assistance professional. That's a very regulated kind of clinical world. We have what's called peer support and coaching services. So we're able to interact at a different level. And one of the things that can help in a situation with that is if the individual person themselves has somebody to help advocate. I had a situation with a person very similar to what you're talking about, and the doctor prescribed a benzodiazepine to this individual. He had an anxiety issue, and he prescribed a medication called Xanax. And if you know anything about Xanax, it's going to lay you out pretty good, at least when you first start taking it. And he was in a circumstance like what you're talking about, and he didn't understand that he could go back to this doctor and advocate for himself. He was an older person, and a lot of like people think that doctors have this ultimate authority, right? You got to take this specific med, and we were able to help him go back and articulate and say, I can't take this, it's impairing me at work. And so those resources that you have, it comes back to some of that. Maybe they can help you navigate some of that stuff. Because again, when we're talking to the person, it's our job to help figure out how to connect and help them figure that out. So perhaps bringing an EAP into that conversation or other support services may help as well. But it's an excellent question. And I don't for a minute think that we can throw that stuff out the window, right? Like, we got to live in the real world. I wish I had I wish I had my own personal doctor, right, that I could see for an hour every time, but I get 7.5 minutes. And so it is what it is to a certain extent, yeah.
I want to check on time, Casey. How are we doing? 10 minutes?
50.
Okay. I wanted to ask a question about the future. Maybe, Mohammed, ask you to talk about this a little bit. So what do you see as future trends or maybe some research areas that would help this cause?
I think when it comes to mental health, I think about it as 3 stages per se. First is awareness, and I think for 75 years we've been doing this, but we came really a long way in this. Like, the fact that we are in the National AASHTO meeting talking about this is pretty good. I think that became now forefront for a lot of different institutions. So I think the awareness, definitely we should keep pushing, but we're getting there. Implementation, that is where we are middle of the road. There are great programs out there, whether it's contractors or some DOTs or some different institutions, which is pretty much having a program and implementing that program and helping people and having, in the implementation, they have to have a difference between when we talk about suicide and opioid prevention, that's one thing, and that is end of the road kind of thing. What we will try to get to, and I hope that we will reach this at least at some level, is that we have mental health well-being, meaning it's way beyond that. Meaning I'm here, I don't have to go all the way to the right or all the way to the left, and then help me when I'm there. Let's try to make sure that we are doing well in the first place. And that will actually hopefully bring those numbers down. That is really good implementation. But that gets me to the third thing. The third trend, which is we're really almost, sometimes I can almost say non-existent, or very few people will ever do that, which is measuring the success of the implementation. That's the third aspect. So awareness is good. Okay, implementation, not really good or not at all being really measured. And that is a little bit dangerous, because how can we really know if our implementation is effective or not? How do we know that? And even if we're good, should we get better? How will we know that, right? So measuring the implementation, how good we are getting, is extremely important. I think there should be a ton of research and work that we should do to keep pushing implementation and measuring that progress. Because I think I'm also like a very quantitative person, again, engineers, right? So, but like really, if we don't measure something, we won't know really where we're at. And that is extremely important also, because that is how you can sell it as well. I always say, sometimes play a devil's advocate and say, what if I'm just a mean person? I don't care about people. I don't care about mental health. Just whatever, just work. Even if you're that person, for whatever reason, right, you're still going to care about mental health because of two main aspects. If I ask anybody in the room, how is the workforce issues that we're suffering from? Everybody understand how crazy it is now, right? I have like every single student of mine coming with 5 and 6 different offers in their hand, whether they're really good students or not. So that tells you a lot, right? I have some of my older students telling me that, Muhammad, we just need bodies out there. We're just hiring people. Your qualification is, can you breathe? Let's go. Like, it's really funny. Like, but that is how much we are in need. So to retain this is extremely important. And that was also part of the conversation as well. So retention is big. And the other thing is productivity. If you have a mentally well employee, is a productive employee. So even if I am a devil himself and that I don't care about this, I still have to care for those reasons, right? But again, if you measure this, you can sell those points very well, right? Because you can see, hey, here is how much we're improving in productivity. Here's how much we're improving our retention because of that. So that is why I kept stressing really about the third trend, which is how can we measure things? If we do this very well, that would be awesome. But the other also thing, which is maybe just a tag along, please try your best as DOTs or any kind of institution to allow research access. I understand liability issues, but work with researchers to get access. Without information access, we can't do research. We can't tell people, hey, here's how you measure, the best way to measure this. Hey, here's how to construct a really good developed program for mental health. So we have to allow access as much. And you can work with researchers of how to protect people's identities and making everything anonymous. So there's a lot of good work and research to be done. And those are the trends that I'm seeing so far.
Thank you. And we're at time almost. I want to ask one final question, and let's go down the panel and give these folks who have remained to the very end some takeaways from our conversation. What can they take back to their organizations, in their positions? What can they do to make a difference?
I guess my takeaway, or one thing I'd recommend, mental health wasn't really on my radar a couple years ago, I'll be honest. But just because nothing has happened within your organization, please don't put your head in the sand and pretend that it's not going to. This is something that's not going away. So anything you can do, whether it's looking at the resources your agency or state already offer that are out there, those types of things. But if anything, just start the conversation. That's kind of the one takeaway that I had, at least. Once I started the conversation, I realized there was a lot more going on within the organization than I was aware of. So that would be my one takeaway.
3 things. Progress, share, access. Progress means those 3 things that we talked about: awareness, implementation, measurement. If you don't have anything, do awareness. If you have awareness, go to implementation, please. Like push, for that in your institution. And if you're in both, look for ways to measure. That's the progress part. Share with other DOTs and everyone. So it's easier to learn from each other, of course. And access, give access to researchers. That's what I was just talking about. So hopefully you can remember those 3.
Yeah, I think when we talked earlier about the number of people that get help and how most people don't ever reach out, I've been toiling on the front lines of this opioid epidemic for 20 years, and if I've learned anything, I've learned that it's not a solution that I'm going to take care of and the people that do behavioral health work are going to take care of. This is not a matter of adding additional counselors out there. It's not a matter of opening up another rehab or anything like that. It is a community problem. It is a workforce problem. It's all hands on deck, if that makes sense. The only way, because it's gotten so bad, guys, and it's gotten so bad because the helping paradigm is founded on a faulty premise of a person has to hit bottom and become willing to get help. That's not how it works. There's nothing about that is true. And so what we need to do is understand that all of us can be part of the solution. That it doesn't have to be a certain person with a certain set of qualifications. I will obviously do very specialized things if I'm talking to a person, but you are You are just as important to the process of overcoming this behavioral health apocalypse that we're dealing with as any therapist or any psychiatrist or anyone out there. And if we can start thinking that way, I think really cool kind of creative solutions can follow. But if we think that this is about, the person in the therapy office solving the problem, the therapist is never even going to get a chance to talk to the person, if that makes sense. I can't help anybody if I can't touch them, if I can't talk to them. So it's an all hands on deck solution is what I would say would be my takeaway.
So again, as I mentioned earlier, I spent half my career in the Department of Transportation, and it's very much a privilege to be up here and talking to all of you. I thank everyone that's interested in this topic and taking action. I will share two things. It's not about when do we start, it's just about starting, okay? So just start the conversation, start taking some kind of action. And I'll leave you with this. We've shared a lot of information, a lot of data. It may feel very negative, very doom and gloom, but as the slide up on the screen says, building hope through action, there is hope. And on the positive side of things, something as small as this little chip, looks like a poker chip, it's called a hope coin. And this is our signatory claim to fame, if you will, in this space. And there's probably 1 million plus of this style of coin in circulation around the world. And when we started this, we didn't know how to reach the industry. We didn't know if this was even going to work, if we were going to be able to reach the folks that were the toughest, baddest construction workers out there, right? That persona. And I have story after story how this small little piece of plastic has saved a worker's life. It has saved a child. It has saved a grandchild. It has saved a friend by just sharing a message of hope. And as the coin says, your story isn't over. You're not alone. And hope stands for hold on, pain ends. And we can end this on a positive note that we are saving lives by just simply starting the conversation and taking action. And I would ask, as Rich eloquently put, in one word or one phrase, just think outside the box. Just think outside the box.
We don't have hope coins, but we do have some stickers on the tables back there, which I think could be something to take back and have a conversation with your family and your kids, your grandkids. In my case, they love those stickers. So help yourself on your way out. Thank you to the panelists. This was an awesome experience for me, and I hope those in the audience got something out of it as well. Thank you all for sticking around late in the day. I hope you all have a great evening.